Exodus 21 and verse 28. If an ox gore a man or a woman that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. If there be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give for the ransom of his life whatsoever is laid upon him. Whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to this judgment, shall it be done unto him. If the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto the master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. It's a little bit of a different kind of text, and it sits right in the middle of a section in the book of Exodus. It's called the Book of the Covenant. You'll find that phrase in chapter 24 and verse number 7. Of course, you know that the Lord gave Moses the 10 Commandments that's recorded in chapter 20. And then right after that, Moses was given a series of case laws that applies the 10 Commandments to everyday life. You find those laws in chapter 21, chapter 22, and chapter 23. And those laws are, as I said, applications of the 10 Commandments. And they're written in very different legal language than the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are very general principles. They have a very broad and a very universal application. But these case laws are more specific. And they speak to 1,001 different scenarios that can come up in different situations and different relationships. And it's not meant to be a comprehensive legal code that covers every imaginable or possible scenario, but they're descriptive, they're representative of what could happen. And they're written in the if-then formula. If this happens, then this is the remedy or the penalty. For example, the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Well, it's a very broad commandment. Well, in Exodus 22 and verse number 1, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. And so that's expanding upon that 8th commandment, and it's specific. If you steal an ox or sheep, there's a penalty, and there's a different penalty for an ox as there is for a sheep. And so the 10 Commandments give you the fundamental. It gives you the base, and then the Book of the Covenant, it applies those general laws to all of these specific circumstances. The 10 Commandments are written in stone. The rest of the law, including these case laws, are written in parchment. And the reason is to show the inflexible, absolute, unchanging nature of the 10 Commandments. But case laws may change with societal changes. For example, I don't have an ox. In fact, I don't know anybody here that would have an ox. And so if you don't have an ox, then this specific law wouldn't mean anything to you. You would look for a principle behind it, but as a law, the law is not something that you have to be concerned with. If you don't have an ox, that might gore somebody. There are some people who call themselves Christian Reconstructionists or theonomists, and they say that we should enforce all of these laws and penalties on our own modern justice system. If you believe that, then you would believe in a church state or a church-run state like the Reformers set up. But these laws were never intended for us to set up as specific laws. Listen, it was never intended for the United States or for any other nation for that matter to adopt all of these specific laws as the laws of our land. They are illustrative of the principle behind the 10 Commandments. And when you step back and you just take a big 40,000-foot view of the law as a whole, there's some very, very broad applications that you can make. One is that God is concerned about the public behavior of His people. What all of these laws show is that God cares about how His people live in society. He doesn't want us to live in private piety, but in public morality. He wants our relationship to Him and our obedience to Him to be played out in the public arena. It's a contradiction to come in here and be pious and to go out there and to be immoral. So the laws of God are not just to be kept in the heart, but they are to be lived out in everyday living. It touches every phase of your life. Another broad principle that you look at when you look at the law as a whole is that God is concerned for equal justice for everyone. The slave was to be treated with the same justice as the free man. And the poor was to be given equity with the rich man. And the woman was afforded the same protections as the man. And so equal justice is a prevailing theme all throughout the law. Now for just a moment, I want to just give you a very brief breakdown of the categories of this case law, and then I'm going to our particular law. And so I want you just to look at chapter 21, and we're not going to read the verses, but if you want to just mark the divisions in your Bible, verse 1 through 11 are laws regarding slavery. And there's been a lot of confusion among Bible students over how the Bible views slavery. One question is, why doesn't the Bible just come out and condemn slavery? And to be honest with you, we don't have a good answer to that question. The Bible doesn't support slavery, but it does allow for it. It does make concessions for it because it was a reality. Well, one thing that will help you is to realize that you cannot make a strong correlation between what the Bible talks about in servitude and slavery and something like what would be in your mind like the African slave trade. There's no similarity between the two. And what may interest you is that all of the laws concerning slavery in the Bible are designed to protect the slave. Yeah. God is concerned for the rights and the well-being of even the least of citizens. If you were to study the codes of law that were written back in those days of the ancient Near East, you would not find one code, not one law that protected the rights of slaves. Only in the law of God are the very least given rights and protections. It's interesting, in the 17th and 18th century, you've heard of the Code of Hammurabi? You've heard of that, surely in school? Famous code that was written back in the 17th and 18th century. And in that code, it does address the rights of slaves. By the way, it addresses it at the very end of the code. But I would just have you to notice that God puts it at the very beginning. So God's concerned about slaves' rights. There was about 11 different ways that a person could end up as being a servant to a master in Israel. You could commit a crime and have to pay restitution, or you could owe a debt that you couldn't pay off, or you could be so poor that you couldn't live any other way. There was about 11 different ways, but whatever the circumstances were, the guiding principle was that the servant was to be treated with respect and fairness and equity. So verse 1 to 11 is laws regarding slavery. Then in verse 12 through 17, there are laws regarding capital punishment. And there are some who say that the death penalty is barbaric and that it promotes a culture of death. Been a lot of arguments made against it. I'd remind you that all the way back in Genesis chapter 9, that God established a life for a life. And what the death penalty ultimately teaches is the value of human life. That when you take someone else's life, that's so serious, you took the life of somebody that's created in the image of God, and you have to pay the ultimate penalty. Laws regarding capital punishment. And then, in verse 18 through verse number 32, there are laws regarding personal injury. Sometimes something happens through negligence, not intentional, but through negligence that leads to an injury that's less than death. And it doesn't warrant capital punishment, but it does require some type of restitution. So in these verses, you read about two men that get in a heated argument. One picks up a stone and hits the other guy. Or a man injures his servant, or a pregnant lady is injured and she loses her child. We find even in our text that you are responsible even for your animals. If you have an animal that gets loose and injures another person, then you are held responsible for that. And understand, it's not all inclusive. It is representative. And we could come up with 100 different hypotheticals, your car and all of these things. But the overall principle is the principle of responsibility in those cases. Then you come to chapter 21 and verse 33. Through chapter 22 and verse 15, you have laws regarding property rights. And in those verses, here's a man who digs a pit, and another man's animal falls into it. Here's the case of one man's beast goring another man's beast. There's a case of you setting a fire and it spreading to your neighbor's field. There's the case of your animal getting loose and he's grazing loose in somebody else's field. There are several scenarios where a person borrows or leases something and that thing is damaged or stolen while it is in your possession. You're liable for that. Again, it's not giving you every possible situation that can happen, but here are guidelines for the judges of Israel to use in the judging of individual cases. But in our text tonight, we come to a very fascinating case. It is the case of the dangerous ox. And this would fall under what we would call animal control laws. We have such ordinances. Maybe in your neighborhood there is a leash law, so your dog can't run around all over the neighborhood. Or if your dog gets loose and bites the neighbor or kills the neighbor's cat, that would be okay, but not according to the law. You're going to be held responsible for this. And even in this law, the sanctity of life is upheld, because even if an animal takes a human life, then it is still treated as a murder. Now look at the law. Look at verse 28. If an ox gore a man or woman that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. This is an agrarian culture, and so oxen are used to plow the fields and other farm-related work. This is not a pet. And if your ox got loose and attacked someone and that person died, then you have to kill that ox. The owner is not charged with murder, but you are liable because it is your ox. It would be severe to put the owner to death because it is something that happened negligently, not intentionally, but you still suffer the loss of your ox that was probably very useful to you in farming. It's going to cost you something. It's not going to cost you your life, but it is going to cost you something. Now, why is the ox killed? Why is that? Well, I believe the reason why is because it is contrary to God's original intent for an animal to attack a human. Because way back in Genesis chapter 1, God gave man dominion over the animal kingdom. It is an act of rebellion against creation. It is a direct result of the curse. And God teaches us to value human life to the extent that all of creation is to honor it, even an ox. And if a beast goes against God's intent of creation and takes a human life, then that beast is to be removed from creation. But then why is the ox to be stoned? And it's specific that the ox is to be stoned. The ox is stoned to keep it from being eaten. You can't benefit from this in any way. The Jew is forbidden to eat meat with blood in it, and by stoning it, there is no bloodletting, meaning that that meat is unclean to them. And by the way, by stoning it and killing it this way, the ox was a clean animal. But by stoning it and killing it this way, the beast is being treated as an unclean animal. It was a clean animal, but now it's being treated as if its nature has changed and it is now unclean. There is a transformation that has taken place. It is unclean because of its offense. But then look at verse number 29. The circumstances change. But if the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it has been testified to his owner, and he has not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. Well, now the situation is a lot different. The owner knew that the ox was aggressive. He knew that the ox was dangerous, but he didn't take strong enough measures to keep the ox contained. In fact, he's been warned by others, hey, your ox is trouble, but he kept it anyway. And now when the ox gets loose another time, and now when the ox kills somebody, both the ox and the owner now have to pay with their life. Well, the principle behind it is that you are responsible for the injuries that you directly cause, but you're responsible for that which you don't cause but should have prevented. When you have a deadly animal and you are negligent to keep it contained, in the eyes of the law, you are a deadly doer. We have a golden doodle puppy. A golden doodle puppy. A very sissified kind of dog. Our dog might lick you to death, but our dog wouldn't know how to bite a person. If somebody came into our house as a burglar, our dog would wag its tail and just be glad to have company. That's the kind of dog that we have. And if somebody was to come to our house and that dog bit somebody, it would be so out of character. It would be so shocking, so unexpected. But I'm still responsible. I would still have to pay the doctor bill. I would still be responsible, liable for whatever damages you suffer. But now if I had a pit bull, and I kept that pit bull on a chain, and that pit bull was always snarling and always lunging and growling and snapping and trying to bite somebody, I know that is a dangerous animal. And if that dog gets loose and injures a child, my penalty is going to be a lot more severe. Because I took the risk of keeping that dangerous animal. That dog obviously will have to be put to sleep. But I could face criminal charges. At least I could face civil lawsuits. That's the situation of verse 29. So look at verse 30. If there be laid on him a sum of money, then he should give for the ransom of his life whatever is laid upon him. Because the death was unintentional, it's not premeditated, God allows in his mercy a substitute punishment for the owner. If the surviving family will allow, instead of that man being put to death, they can set a price for restitution. And the owner can pay that price as a ransom for his life. The offense can be covered either by death or by a ransom payment. And the amount is not open to negotiation. He doesn't set the price. It's whatever the victim's family or the victim... Now there's gospel all in that, and I don't have time to preach that right there. Look at verse number 31. Whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to this judgment shall it be done unto him. No amount of money can replace a lost son or a lost daughter. But again, the family could demand a civil penalty and he not be put to death. Verse 32. If the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If he gets out and he injures a servant, a slave, then the law just goes ahead and sets a price at 30 shekels of silver. That's the price of a slave, so it's 30 shekels of silver. Now a lot of people have read that, and I've read commentaries, and they think that the slave is being devalued, that he's worth only 30 shekels. I think just the opposite. I believe that the price for the servant is set at 30 shekels of silver to prevent a court from allowing less to be paid, since it is a slave. It would be just like man. Be just like man to devalue a slave. So I believe that God is saying, no, his life is valuable too. And it's not to say that his life is worth no more than 30 shekels of silver, but it is to say he cannot be valued less than 30 shekels of silver. So in this particular law, there are several layers of meaning and application. There's the value of a human life, even if that human life is taken by a beast. There's a responsibility that you and I hold for negligent behavior, even if it's not intentional. There's the value of the servant in that he cannot be devalued by a lesser ransom. There's a law of substitution that a person can pay a ransom price for his own life if the family agrees. But I think that behind that there's even a deeper lesson. What do I do with it? How do I apply this to my life? This particular scenario will never play out in my life, so am I just to look at what the law said for them? What does this law say for me? How can I apply this passage right now, right here? I want to give you 3 principles tonight that's taken from this passage. I want you to write them down. I hope they're thought-worthy. 3 broad principles. Here's the first one. That which cannot be kept must be killed. That which cannot be kept must be killed. A man owns an ox, and that's not a bad thing. In fact, in an agricultural world, an ox would be a very useful animal to own. So please understand, there's nothing wrong with owning an ox. There's nothing inherently evil in owning that ox. You can plow with an ox. You can haul a cart with an ox. So an ox is very useful. But in this case, this man's ox has a rebellious streak and has gotten out of his pen on occasion. Not all oxen are dangerous animals, but it has become apparent that this particular ox is causing more trouble than he's worth. And if you can't keep it, you have to kill it. There's a statement found in verse number 30 or verse number 29. He hath not kept him in. As long as he contains the ox, it is no problem. But if he fails to control the ox, if he fails to contain that ox, if he fails to keep that ox in, then you must kill that ox before that ox kills someone. Do you see that? If you can't contain that ox, then you better get rid of that ox. You may have a dangerous dog, and that dog is your guard dog, and you use that dog to protect your business or your house or whatever it might be. And if that dog ever gets loose, you know that that dog is liable to hurt someone. If you are unable to keep that dog in a pen, you better get rid of the dog. So, preacher, what are you talking about? One application. You and I live in a digital world, and we're never going back to an analog world. All these kids will grow up with a gadget in their hand. We call them digital natives. If you can't figure out how to do something on your smartphone, hand it to any one of these kids. Correct? It is amazing to me that my grandkids who can't spell cat can turn a video on the phone. I am right now in the process of trying to reduce my digital footprint. It's more of a security, privacy, hate big tech thing for me. Do I need all of these devices? Closing online accounts, trying to get rid of most of big tech like Google and YouTube and all of that. And please understand, it is not wrong to own those devices. Please understand, I'm not preaching against it. I have right now on my desk at home, I have a big MacBook computer. I have a laptop. I have an Apple laptop. I'm preaching off of an iPad tonight, and a Bible, but an iPad. And somewhere out there in the truck, I have an iPhone. I would love to get rid of the iPhone, but that's just because I'm suspicious of the tracking. It's more privacy more than anything. And I want you to understand, I don't think it's wrong to own those things, because those things can be very useful tools. But good things can become bad things. They can become addictive. You can pull up a lot of wicked stuff on a phone or a computer or an iPad. There are men who have sat for hours in a house or an office somewhere, and they have stared at pornography until their brain is fried. And you go to chat rooms and online dating sites, and they explore every kind of vile subject that you want to think about. And here's what happens is a man or woman says, hey, I have control over this. I'm going to build a fence around it. I'm going to get a blocking, and I'm going to get a filter, and I'm going to have an accountability partner, and I'm going to only use it during the day, and I'm going to be careful. I'm going to build a fence to keep the dangerous ox in. Those things are good, and you should. But you and I know that ox has a way of getting out. A young man who is addicted to pornography will find out a way to get around the filter on his computer. I have had men sit in my office, and they have bought secret computers. They have opened up secret email accounts. They had a private login. And I'm telling you tonight, if you cannot keep that ox in the fence, if it is evident that you cannot control it, here's what you better do. You had better kill the ox. And when I say that, you say, but I can't imagine living without a smartphone. No, you better start imagining living without your family. Imagine living without the power of God in your life. Imagine living without a pure mind. That's what you better imagine. But there's nothing wrong with having an ox. But please understand. But if you can't keep that ox in its proper place, you better kill that ox. The risk of owning the ox is not greater than the value of owning the ox. Yeah. So some of you ladies, so you don't feel like I've left you out, and men. You have tried to control social media, and you're addicted to it for hours a day. And please understand, I'm not preaching against social media. I don't think it is a sin for you to have social media, but it can very quickly turn into a sin. And what you do is you keep building a fence and setting little rules to keep the fox in. Maybe it's time to just go home and just kill the ox. You can apply this to the friends that you fellowship with on the weekend. I don't think you ought to go kill them, but I think you may need to kill the relationship. Whatever you have in your life that you can't keep and is dangerous for you or others, you need to kill it. I have a lady that used to go to our church. She has emailed me several times in the last several months since all of the election fiasco. She is worried sick where our country is headed. And she's asking questions like, are they going to shut our churches down? Are we headed to civil war? And here's her problem. I'm surmising this is her problem. She's watching the news every day. And she's scared and she's worried. I'll tell you the best thing she can do. Kill that ox. Have not watched or listened to one single minute of network or cable news on the TV or the radio. XMs, I have not listened to a minute of it since the election. It was an ox that I needed to kill in my life, and I missed it for about 2 hours. I'm glad that ox is dead. And I don't care if it is sports. I don't care if it's video games. I don't care if it's credit cards. I don't care if it's social media. If you have an ox in your life that you cannot keep, then it must die. That which cannot be kept must be killed. Here's the reason why. Secondly, because that which is dangerous will become deadly. Everybody knew that this ox was wont to push. That's the phrase. Simply means he's the kind of ox that tries to gore you if you're not careful. Now, not every ox is that way, but this ox is just cantankerous. You knew to make sure that your kids stayed away from this ox. You steered clear of this ox, and the owner knew its temperament, and he knew to make sure that he kept him secured in a strong pen, because if some ox gets out, they might not do any damage, but if this ox gets out, this ox is going to kill someone. You're taking a risk keeping this ox because the potential for harm is very great. And here's what happens. One day the ox gets out. And that ox goes on a rampage and gores somebody, and maybe gores a little child. And the ox doesn't care who he gores. He's just out to kill somebody. And can you imagine the horror of hearing that your ox got loose and now a little child is dead? Can you imagine? Can you imagine having to go to that family and there's the bloody body of that little child lying there, and you know it was your ox that did that, and now you are responsible for that death? I tell you that dangerous things can become deadly things. And the reason why you have to kill the ox, because if you don't, it'll eventually kill you. There's people right now who are hooked on prescription drugs. And that ox got loose and it destroyed so many things in their life. There's Christian people who started with a little wine, just a little drink, with dinner, and then they moved to harder stuff, and now they find themselves a full-on drunk. And they played with dangerous things, but those dangerous things have a way of killing your walk with God and killing your relationship with your wife and killing your influence with your children and killing your love for the house of God. And you may be still breathing and living, but inside you're dead to so many things that you used to be alive to because you kept a dangerous ox around. That which is dangerous will become deadly. Most of us probably have weapons in our home. I am for gun ownership. I own guns. I would never tell you how many guns I own. And if you're a responsible gun owner, then you know that a gun can be a dangerous weapon. You should know that. And so we take measures to keep it safe. So maybe you keep your gun locked in a safe. Or maybe you keep a trigger lock on it. Surely you keep the gun unloaded. You wouldn't take a loaded gun and just lay it on the kitchen table and just leave it there, especially if you have children around. You're playing with fire. And surely that there have been instances where a child picked up a gun that the owner thought was empty, but there was one bullet in the chamber, and they thought it was a toy, and it ended up killing somebody. That'd be a horrible thing. How could you possibly ever live with yourself if that ever happened? And it would probably be so traumatic that you'd probably say, I'm done. Get all the guns out of the house. I don't want to have guns anymore. It's too dangerous. But you know, if it's so dangerous and if you're going to be irresponsible in keeping it, probably better to get rid of it before it does that than after it does it. I'm not against owning guns. I own guns. Guns in themselves are not dangerous. No gun has just ever got up and shot somebody. It's dangerous in the hands of a child or a criminal. It's never just shot somebody on its own. But the principle is that if you have something that is dangerous in your life, and if you can't keep it, that will eventually become deadly to you. That which cannot be kept must be killed, because that which is dangerous will become deadly. And here's the third principle. That which you can handle will harm others. If you'll notice that this ox got loose, it did not attack its owner because the owner knew the ox. He probably raised this ox's calf, knew the temperament. So he knew what you could and could not do with the ox. He knew not to walk behind the ox. He knew not to get too close to the horns. He knew keep your eyes on him at all times. I can handle him. I can keep him in the pen, and this ox will never harm me. Preacher, I can handle this. Preacher, I know what I'm doing. Preacher, don't preach to me. I've been handling this ox for a long time, and I know that I'm stronger, I'm smarter than the ox. And that ox may never come after you, and it lulls you in a false sense of security, but all the while it's hurting somebody else. So you send the kids to bed, and you stay up and you watch HBO or Cinemax or whatever. Things that are filthy. And you justify it because you're an adult, you're mature, you can handle it. You'd never show this to the kids. And your children will never see that. But that filth kills any semblance of God in your life as a spiritual leader in your home. They never hear their daddy pray. They lose the influence of having a godly father instead of one who just plays one. Well, you're handling it, but it's harming somebody else. There are men who have kept that porn addiction hid for years and years and years. And they know that it is wrong, but for years ago they surrendered to it. But at least I keep it away from everybody else. And they may live all of their life and that wife never know But she also doesn't know why there's no intimacy in the marriage. Why is this marriage like it is? You handled it, but it gored the marriage to death. The danger of the dangerous ox is that it is dangerous to somebody else. This owner is never gored by his ox. This ox never attacked him. But in the end, it will cost him either his life or the life of somebody else. And he doesn't get to set the price. The price is going to be set for him. You think that you can handle it. But what you handle is going to harm somebody else. So I ask you tonight, do you have an ox in your life that needs to die? It may not even be wrong to have the ox. But I tell you that if you can't keep it, that ox will eventually get out and it's going to hurt somebody. And if you can't control it, you need to kill it. You say, oh, there's no verse against the ox. I'm not trying to see how much I can get away with. I'm trying to see how safe I can be. I'm trying to see how far away from sin I can be. And do you have enough concern for your family and for those in your life to say that this ox here is dangerous and I don't believe it is good for our spiritual life and we need to just kill the ox? It's a friend or a relationship or a hobby, an addiction. The dangerous ox must